He didn't fire my lover. He made him my warden. His kiss wasn't gentle. It was a bruising, claiming act that mirrored the ferocity of my own need. There was no tenderness in it, not at first. There was only a shared explosive recognition of a hunger that had gone unfed for too long. My hands were in his hair, pulling him closer, my meticulously applied lipstick smearing across his face. He tasted of coffee and a faint hint of whiskey from a flask I knew he kept. And it was the most real thing I had tasted in decades. I expected screaming. I expected divorce. When my husband found out about my affair with our driver, I expected my world to end. Instead, he smiled, offered my lover a promotion, and that's when my real punishment began. Welcome back. Today's story is about the lines we draw in our lives, between love and duty, passion and propriety, and what happens when those lines are erased by a man who sees everything. If you believe that the most dangerous prisons are the ones we don't see until the door is locked from the outside, make sure you subscribe. Now, let's begin Isabel's story. My life with Richard was a masterpiece of curated silence. Our house in Greenwich, Connecticut, wasn't a home. It was a museum, and I was its most exquisitely maintained and most lifeless exhibit. Every surface gleamed from the sterile white marble of the foyer to the polished silver on the dining table, all of it reflecting a perfect cold light. At 62, Richard was a titan of finance, a man who didn't speak in conversations, but in declarations. He moved through our world with a frictionless grace. His love expressed not in touches or whispers, but in the rising value of my stock portfolio and the flawless clarity of the diamonds he placed around my neck. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a testament to his success. And at 58, I played the part beautifully. I was graceful, elegant, and as hollow as a Fabergé egg. The silence of our home was the loudest thing I'd ever known. It was a physical presence, a thick, suffocating dust that settled on everything. We could sit across from each other at a 10-foot dining table, the clink of our cutlery the only sound, and an entire universe of things would go unsaid. He never asked about my day, and I never asked about his. We were the perfect, silent partners in the multi-million-dollar corporation of our marriage. I was lonely, but it was a loneliness so profound and long-standing that I had forgotten what any other state felt like. It was simply the weather of my life. And then there was Leo. He was my driver. That was his title. A word so simple and reductive for what he became. He was 40, maybe 45, with a quiet solidity that felt like an anchor in my drifting world. He wasn't handsome in the chiseled, boardroom way that Richard's colleagues were. His was a rugged, weathered appeal, with lines around his eyes that spoke of a life lived outside of climate-controlled rooms. He had a stillness about him, a coiled energy that was present in the way his hands, strong and calloused, rested on the leather steering wheel of the Rolls-Royce. Our relationship began in the rearview mirror. In the silent, upholstered cocoon of the car, our eyes would meet. His gaze wasn't intrusive or improper. It was simply observant. He was the only person in my life who actually looked at me, not at the pearl earrings or the silk blouse, but at the flicker of sadness in my eyes, the faint tremor in my hand as I reached for my phone. Richard saw me as an asset. Leo saw me as a person. The affair didn't start with a decision. It began with a sound, a choked sob I couldn't hold back one rainy Tuesday afternoon, after a particularly brutal charity luncheon where I'd been treated like a walking checkbook. I thought he hadn't heard, but he pulled the car over to a quiet, tree-lined street. He didn't turn around. He just killed the engine, and the world went silent, except for the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers and the sound of my own ragged breath. "Are you all right, Mrs. Sterling?" he asked. His voice a low rumble. I couldn't answer. Instead, I just wept. I wept for my empty house, my silent husband, for the woman I was supposed to have been. I wept for 25 years of being an object. When the storm in me finally subsided, I felt a weight shift in the kites. He was no longer in the driver's seat. He was in the back with me, sitting on the opposite side, a respectful distance between us. He held out a folded, clean handkerchief. It wasn't silk or linen. It was simple, soft cotton. It smelled faintly of him, a clean, masculine scent of soap and something uniquely his. "I don't know who you are anymore," I whispered to the rain-streaked window. "I do," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I see you every day." That was it. That was the moment the world shifted on its axis. He saw me. In that moment, he was the only person on earth who did. The desire, when it came, was a tidal wave. It had been building for years, a deep, subterranean reservoir of longing I didn't even know I possessed. It wasn't just physical. It was a desperate, clawing hunger to feel something, anything other than the polite numbness of my life. I became obsessed with him, with the small forbidden details of his existence, the way his knuckles were scarred, the faded tattoo of a bird's wing that peeked from under his cuff, the quiet intensity in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. The first time was a madness, a reckless, primal act of desperation. He was driving me home from a gala. I was in the back, adorned in diamonds and couture, feeling like a doll in a box. The silence in the car was humming with unspoken tension. I could see the muscles in his jaw working as he drove. I didn't think. I just acted. "Leo, pull over." He obeyed, guiding the long, sleek car into a darkened lover's lane overlooking the city lights. He turned to ask what was wrong, but I was already moving, clambering over the center console, the silk of my gown whispering against the fine leather. The logistics were absurd, a tangle of expensive fabric and desperate limbs. But the moment my mouth found his, none of it mattered. His kiss wasn't gentle. It was a bruising, claiming act that mirrored the ferocity of my own need. There was no tenderness in it, not at first. There was only a shared explosive recognition of a hunger that had gone unfed for too long. My hands were in his hair, pulling him closer, my meticulously applied lipstick smearing across his face. He tasted of coffee and a faint hint of whiskey from a flask I knew he kept. And it was the most real thing I had tasted in decades. That was how it began. Not as romance, but as a fever. The back of the Rolls-Royce became our sanctuary, our confessional, our battlefield. The moments we stole were frantic, almost violent in their intensity. My need for him was a physical ache, a gnawing emptiness that only he could fill. When he was inside me, it wasn't just an act of pleasure. It was an act of exorcism. I wasn't Mrs. Sterling, the society wife. I was Isabel, a woman of flesh and blood, and a desperate, ravenous heart. His touch was the antithesis of my life. Where my world was smooth, polished, and cold, he was rough, warm, and real. The scrape of his 5 o'clock shadow against the soft skin of my neck, the possessive grip of his hands on my hips, holding me in place as if I might fly apart. These sensations were my lifeline. We rarely spoke during these encounters. There was no need. Our bodies communicated in a primal, desperate language that transcended words. It was a language of friction and heat, of scent and sound. The fog that would cloud the windows, shielding us from the world, was the visible manifestation of our shared breath, our shared secret. I craved the loss of control. As in every other aspect of my life, I was poised, measured, and restrained. With him, I was allowed to be a force of nature. I was the one who initiated, my hands tearing at the buttons of his uniform shirt, my mouth leaving marks on his skin. I wanted to consume him, to absorb his vitality into my own barren soul. It was a frantic, almost selfish passion. I was a woman dying of thirst, and he was the only source of water. In those stolen moments, pressed against the cool leather, the city lights a distant glittering blur, I felt more alive than I had in my entire adult life. It was a terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly unsustainable state of being. We created a world in that car, a bubble of steam and secrecy that traveled through the pristine streets of Greenwich. The risk was part of the addiction. The idea of my husband, of anyone, seeing us was a terrifying thrill. We were hiding in plain sight, our rebellion contained within the very symbol of my gilded cage. The car, Richard's car, paid for with his money, became the one place on earth I was truly free. Richard, my husband, is a man who notices everything. Not in an emotional sense, he couldn't tell you my favorite color, but in a data-driven one. He is a creature of patterns, of numbers, of anomalies. For months, our secret thrived in the blind spot of his world, a chaotic, emotional variable in his otherwise perfect equation. I believed he was too consumed by his empire to notice the small discrepancies of his wife's schedule, the slightly longer drives home. I underestimated him. I had mistaken his emotional absence for a lack of attention. The truth is, he was always watching. Not me, but the systems that contained me. The discovery, I now believe, was not a single event, but a slow, cold dawn of realization for him. It would have started with the car's GPS logs, a stop on a scenic overlook that lasted 37 minutes, a detour down a deserted road, small deviations from the optimized route. To anyone else, it would be nothing. To Richard, it was a flaw in the data. Then, he would have noticed the change in me. It was subtle, a flush in my cheeks that wasn't from blush, a certain languidness in my movements after an afternoon of shopping, a spark in my eyes that he himself had not put there. I was a depreciating asset that had suddenly, inexplicably, begun to accrue a new kind of value. This, too, was an anomaly. He would not have hired a private investigator. That was too crude, too conventional for a man like Richard. He didn't need grainy photos. He was a man who owned systems. He would have simply activated the interior security camera in the Rolls-Royce. a feature I never knew existed. He would have sat in his silent mahogany-paneled office, a glass of scotch in his hand, and he would have watched. He would have watched me. His perfectly composed wife, his greatest acquisition, unravel in the arms of his employee. He would have seen my passion, my desperation, my hunger. He would have seen it all, not with the hot rage of a betrayed husband, but with the cold, calculating curiosity of a scientist observing a flawed specimen. He would have gathered his data, analyzed the weakness, and then he would have formulated a solution. Not a solution for his marriage, but a solution for his investment. The twist didn't come with a shout. It came with a promotion. Richard summoned me to his study one evening. This was unusual. Our communication was largely nonverbal. He sat behind his enormous desk, the picture of calm authority. "Isabel," he began, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I've been thinking about our security, about the staff. Loyalty is paramount in our world. Wouldn't you agree?" I felt a cold dread snake its way up my spine. "Of course, Richard." "Good," he said, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. "That's why I've decided to make a change. Leo has been with us for 3 years. He's been reliable, discreet. I believe in rewarding such loyalty. I'm promoting him. He'll no longer be just your driver. He's to be my new head of personal security and logistics. It comes with a significant raise, a company car, a different one, of course, and an apartment on the estate. He'll be responsible for everything. My schedule, your schedule, travel, the household staff. He'll be indispensable." The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the leather chair to keep from falling. He knew. He had to know. This wasn't a promotion. It was a chess move, and I had just realized I was a pawn, not a queen. "He'll be working from the house?" I managed to ask, my voice a strangled whisper. "Of course," Richard said, his eyes gleaming with a cold, triumphant light. "I want him close, a man that loyal, a man who knows this family so intimately. You can't put a price on that. He'll be starting immediately. Your new driver is a perfectly competent man from the agency. He'll be here in the morning." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. He walked over to the bar to pour himself a drink. "I trust you'll congratulate Leo on his good fortune," he said over his shoulder. "It's so important to make the staff feel like part of the family, don't you think?" And that was it. No accusations, no screaming match. Just a quiet, elegant, and utterly devastating checkmate. My prison, which had once been the size of a mansion, had shrunk to the size of my own body. The affair was over, not by decree, but by a brilliant, insidious act of corporate restructuring. The back of the Rolls-Royce was once again just a mode of transport, driven by a silent, anonymous stranger. My secret world had been dismantled, paved over, and replaced with a panopticon of my husband's design. Leo was now a constant, silent presence in our lives. He was the ghost at our breakfast table, standing by the door with a tablet, discussing Richard's itinerary. He was the shadow in the hallway, the man who opened my car door for the new driver, his face a perfect mask of professional deference. Our eyes would meet for a fleeting, agonizing second, and in his I would see the same caged horror that I felt in my own soul. Richard's cruelty was a work of art. It was in the small daily tortures. "Leo," he would say at a dinner party, "Isabel looks a little chilly. Would you be so kind as to fetch her pashmina? You know the one she likes, I'm sure." And Leo would have to walk to our bedroom, to the closet where my scent lingered, and retrieve the wrap, his fingers brushing mine for a microsecond as he draped it over my shoulders, all under Richard's benevolent, watchful gaze. He made Leo the warden of my cage. Leo was the one who scheduled my lonely appointments, the spa, the luncheons, the fittings. He was the one who had to stand by, stone-faced, as Richard placed a cold, proprietary hand on the small of my back. Richard had taken the one person who had made me feel alive and turned him into a living symbol of my captivity. He hadn't just ended our affair. He had weaponized it, turning it into an instrument of my daily torment. He hadn't taken Leo away from me. He had given him to me, in a way. I saw him more now than ever before. But he was untouchable. A phantom of the man who had held me in the back of a car. We were two prisoners, forced to watch each other's suffering, unable to speak, unable to touch, unable to escape. The final confrontation happened months later. I couldn't bear the silence any longer. I found Richard in his study, the same room where he had announced my sentence. "Why?" I asked, the single word hanging in the air. "Why not just divorce me, wad boy? Why this performance?" He took a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes cold and analytical. "Divorce, Isabel, is a public admission of failure. It's an untidy emotional process that affects the bottom line. Our marriage, this life, our reputation, it's a 40-year investment. I don't liquidate a core asset over a minor malfunction." He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning. "You see, I was never under the illusion that you loved me. Love is a volatile, unpredictable commodity. I didn't acquire you for love. I acquired you for your beauty, your pedigree, your social grace. You were and are the perfect accessory to my life." He set his glass down with a soft click. "The affair was a maintenance issue, a sign of neglect. You felt unseen, so you sought validation from an employee. A predictable, if disappointing, human error. Firing him and screaming at you would have been an emotional expenditure. Messy, inefficient." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. "So, I corrected the error. I brought the problem in-house. I took the very thing you craved, his attention, his proximity, and I put it on my payroll. I control it now. He works for me. He lives by my rules. He watches you. He serves you. And he remembers that I am the one who signs his checks. Every time you look at him, you are reminded not of your brief, pathetic rebellion, but of my ultimate control." I stared at the man I had lived with for half my life, and for the first time I truly saw him. He wasn't a man. He was a corporation. A predator who didn't kill his prey, but domesticated it, putting it on display in a beautiful, inescapable zoo. My story doesn't have an ending because my sentence is for life. Every morning, I wake up in my museum. I am driven by a stranger. And when I arrive home, Leo is often there to open the door. He is handsome, professional, and entirely out of reach. He is my dashinger, my lover, Bijid, my warden, my ghost. He is the man Richard keeps close, a constant, silent testament not to loyalty, but to the quiet, patient, and utterly devastating nature of his revenge. He didn't just win. He changed the rules of the game so that my very existence is now a point scored in his favor forever. Is this the perfect revenge, or a fate worse than any ending? If this story made you think about the invisible bars that can surround a life, share it with someone who understands. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that explore the complexities of the human heart. Thank you for listening.